Welcome to our Unit 6 discussion board here on our American History 1, United States History 2, 1877 course here. And this week we have an interesting question about the middle class. So in Unit 6, in the lectures, we see the rise of a strong middle class. And what I want you to look at is what is the historical significance of that emergent middle class? How does the emergent middle class of this unit compare with the middle class of today? So one of the things we're looking at this week is historical significance. That's our big skill. And one of the ways to do historical significance, maybe the best way, is to think about how it resonates into today. So when we look at the development of the middle class during this time period, this is a transitional period for the United States. You could come and take a look at this giant monster of a book by Daniel Walker Howe. Incredible door for a book stop. Looks like I remember slogging through this. It's about 900 pages, but it's looking at the transformation of America from 1815 to 1848. And Howe is really looking at all of these factors evaluating evidence, how the United States is changing politically as we move through the first half of the 19th century, looking at how political parties are shifting, some of those things, looking at how we're changing economically. We're moving from an economy that is much more predicated in most parts of the country, particularly in the North, but also in the South, on small independent farmers. Kind of this agrarian vision Jefferson had espoused during kind of his time period. He's still alive. Jefferson didn't die after he was president, right? He lived for a long time. But this idea that we're seeing kind of some of these changes, and economically is where we're seeing a lot of this change. This idea that we see the middle class coming about because you all of a sudden have people are no longer landed or unlanded. You're starting to see people able to specialize. We're getting new technologies. We're building national roads during this time period. We're having massive infrastructure projects like the Erie Canal, which Governor Clinton's going to spearhead in New York State. We're going to see people kind of starting to interact economically in ways we had never seen before. And with that specialization comes urbanization, right? The ability of people to congregate in cities, because instead of needing your own land to grow your own food, to provide for self-sufficiency, you're able to kind of have your own thing. We all do this in different ways in the modern economy. A lot of you have a variety of different jobs. So as you think about what makes up our middle class today, similarly, during this time period, we're starting to see that really emergent middle class for the first time during the first half of the 19th century. We also are seeing crazy or just interesting cultural, social movements during this time period as well. In response to some of these changes, as the middle class emerges, we're seeing this kind of divide, urban-rural split that still manifests itself today, where we have kind of a difference in the urban and rural middle classes. We have differences in standards of living, we have differences in lifeways, and we see a response to kind of the onset of modernity in the form of specialization and capitalism as we move from what people would commonly call kind of a mercantilist system into our capitalist system that emerges in the United States in the 1850s. Those of you that think we just capitalism started in 1776, you'd have a really hard time probably proving that. The idea that this is capitalism as we know it is going to develop during the first half of the 19th century is pretty commonly accepted. And as it does happen, we're seeing pushback from other parts of society. You can see this in things like the cult of Matthias or the Fox sisters. Those are two phenomenons. I always look at this, or the burned over district in New York. So a lot of people are going to start trying to kind of confront modernity with a return to traditional values, and that manifests itself in different ways. People are also going to start looking for the supernatural a little bit more, and that's where we see the Fox sisters. There are a couple of sisters in upstate New York that become essentially America's first mediums. They're allegedly able to channel the spirits of the dead, which is going to make them very popular by the time we get to the American Civil War and many people die. But during the time period, they're really kind of the first major mediums in America, and they catch on in that way is what many scholars would say is a kind of relationally and contextually in line with the emergence of capitalism. The cult of Matthias is definitely a return to traditional values. This is a guy who paraded around New York City wearing a giant chain that he told people he was going to chain up the devil with, and had a giant ruler that was made out of iron that he said he was going to measure people's sins with. But he was able to attract followers, including the incredibly wealthy Elijah Pearson, and they are going to essentially form what we would call a cult, but they're going to build a giant country manor and return to more of a traditional way of living prior to the emergence of this market economy. It's going to be largely self-sufficient. It's going to have very prescribed gender roles. It's going to be all these different things. So as we look at some of this different stuff, we can look at some of these parallels between the middle class of that time and our time, and that's where historical significance really comes in. So I encourage you to think critically about this, get the material out of the lecture, let me know if you have any questions, and continue to have some of these interesting conversations we've been having so far. Good luck this week. Make it a great discussion.